This young man's name is Richie First, a poor college student who worked as an online gambling affiliate. People who needed money would definitely go to see him because they thought that he was the solution. Even a lecturer entrusted his problem to him, until one day he was called by the dean because his job was found out. His campus strictly prohibited all forms of gambling, including people involved in the industry, and he was on the verge of dropping out because of that. He tried to explain that he needed money to pay off his student loan of $21,000 and that had to be paid by next week, but the dean didn't want to know about it, and if he still wanted to study there, he had to give up his job. When he went back to the dorm, Richie couldn't stay still. He risked all the remaining $17,000 of his money on an online poker site, and because he was smart, he was able to calculate his winnings, but unfortunately, his calculations were wrong and he lost all his money. He realized that he had been cheated, so he intended to report this to Ivan Block, the owner of the site, who was currently in Costa Rica. In fact, his choice in dealing with this world of gambling was not apart from the influence of his father. His father was a great gambler who went to every casino to bet his money. Richie then went to meet his father to ask about Ivan Block, but his father hadn't heard about him since he founded his online gambling company. The only thing he knew was that Ivan was in Costa Rica, heaven for gamblers. Craig, Richie's friend from college, forbade him from going. He didn't want his friend to fall into gambling any further, but Richie was determined to get his money back because that was the only thing he had left. No one could stop him from leaving. His friend reminded him that he had to consider their campus rules which prohibit gambling. After that, Richie left for Costa Rica. When he arrived at the airport in Costa Rica, he was invited to gamble by a person named Pet. Richie immediately realized that Pet was the owner of the online gambling site that he had promoted. Pet also introduced him to Cronin, a friend of his. Richie then asked them about Ivan Block, but they didn't know a thing about him. Even according to Cronin, Ivan Block was a legend in the industry. He wouldn't show up unless he got into trouble. Richie was not discouraged. He still planned to look for Ivan Block by going to a meeting of gamblers in Costa Rica. At that meeting, he saw a woman named Rebecca who mentioned Ava's name, so he assumed that she might be able to meet him with Ivan. After convincing her, Richie would be able to meet Ivan Block at his party later. At the party, Richie couldn't fully enjoy it. He instead looked for CCTV to attract Ivan's attention and said that he had found a problem on his site. Thanks to his courage, Ivan's bodyguard immediately met him and showed him the way to meet Ivan. Finally, Richie managed to find Ivan Block. He immediately explained the hacker he found when playing poker on Ivan's site, but Ivan's response was far beyond expectations. He thanked him and immediately told him to leave. Early the next morning, Richie was picked up by Ivan's bodyguard and was invited there to discuss further with Ivan. Ivan explained at more length than last night. Apart from thanking Richie, he promised to return all Richie's money used for transactions on his site. He also provided luxury apartment facilities because he had helped him discover the fraud. He also offered him a chance to work with him with a 7-figure salary for a year. He found Richie's extraordinary talent essential for him, so he wanted to invite him to work for him. He would also give full authority to Richie to manage his new site as he believed that he would be able to develop it. Given such a temptation, Richie accepted it and immediately left school. To become Ivan's confidant, he was given a high salary, luxurious facilities, and appointed as the number 2 person after Ivan in the company. Ivan considered him his child and always fulfilled his wishes. Finally, Richie could become the rich person he has always dreamed of. Among all the dreams he had achieved, there was only one that he hadn't had, namely Rebecca. He knew that Rebecca had a special relationship with Ivan, but he couldn't lie that he was attracted to that woman. And secretly, Ivan knew about it, so he started to pay more attention to Richie. He gave him a high workload so that he wouldn't feel like being there. However, Richie was too ambitious. He still accepted the task with full enthusiasm. That night, Richie was given the task of recruiting a man from London named Shecky, an owner of a gambling site called Ultimate, who was able to attract 10% of new gamblers from all users. He saw that potential and decided to send Richie to recruit him. He promised Richie a big bonus if he managed to recruit him. The next day, Richie was going to go to meet Shecky, but he was kidnapped by a group of men who took him to meet an FBI agent named Agent Shavers. Shavers told him that he was targeting Ivan Block, but unfortunately, Costa Rica was outside of the FBI's authority, so he couldn't arrest him. So now Shavers met Richie's help to arrest his own boss because, in fact, Ivan Block had committed many legal violations such as bribes and misuse of customer data. And no matter how good Ivan in Richie's eyes, he was not a good person. Richie was finally released and immediately reported the incident to Ivan. According to Ivan, it was a normal occurrence since he managed his company, and in fact, nothing ever happened to him. He told Richie that it was nothing more than a threat, and because he had bribed all the members of the Costa Rican parliament, they couldn't possibly be caught by the police. He then told Richie to focus on his task to recruit Shecky. Richie immediately met Shecky to recruit him, but he immediately refused because he didn't want to stay away from his wife who was pregnant with their first child. Richie congratulated him, but he also had another offer to negotiate further. He provided a cruise facility and invited some prostitutes to persuade Shecky, and over time he couldn't resist the temptation and quickly forgot his wife and his promise to remain faithful to his marriage, so the next day, Richie used a recording of his affair as a weapon to get Shecky to obey him. Richie promised to keep his affairs from his wife. He was willing to give all of his customer data to Ivan Block's company. After succeeding in recruiting Shecky, Ivan fulfilled his promise to pay a big bonus. Richie immediately held a party to celebrate it. It turned out that Rebecca also came to Richie's party. They then spent time together and finally admitted that they both liked each other. Unfortunately, Rebecca was worried that Ivan, who turned out to be her ex, wouldn't like it. Even though they were no longer in a romantic relationship, she was still bound by a contract and she couldn't possibly break it, so she couldn't openly admit her feelings for Richie. But the most important thing was that they loved each other. The next morning, when Richie returned to his apartment from the party, he found Cronin and Pet arguing. It turned out that Pet, who also worked at Ivan's company, had been arrested by the FBI and was threatening his family's safety, but the FBI still gave him a chance to go home. After hearing this news, Richie assured him that it was nothing more than a bluff by the FBI, but Pet still decided to leave. He could no longer stand it and chose to open his own business instead. In the afternoon, Ivan gave Richie another assignment. This time, he was asked to meet a local official to bribe him some money. He immediately agreed without asking first. He immediately met the official and gave him a suitcase containing money from Ivan. A few moments later, the official admitted that the sum was not by the agreement. Richie was confused because Ivan didn't say anything, so he decided to treat the man as an apology and promised to convey the complaint to Ivan. Shortly after Richie left the place, he was ambushed by some thugs who suddenly beat him. Turned out that the official just now was offended and said that Richie's condition, which is full of wounds, was a message for Ivan to show his disappointment. Richie immediately met Ivan and protested. He asked about Ivan's agreement with the official, who looked annoyed and angry, but Ivan admitted that there was nothing wrong with his agreement. He apologized because Richie was injured, but he also reminded Richie that it was the risk of his job. In other words, if Richie wanted to make money, he had to be ready to fight at any moment. Richie intended to return to America, but he was detained by the Costa Rican police because he was suspected of carrying narcotics. He automatically denied this, but evidence was found in his bag, so he couldn't deny it. Fortunately, before Richie was thrown into prison, Agent Shavers came and promised to protect him in exchange for cooperation. He demanded information about Ivan if Richie wanted to be protected by the FBI. After that, Richie returned to his apartment. Cronin then told him that he found a new secret on Ivan's gambling site. It turned out that Ivan used his customers' accounts to launder his money. He had access to put in and take out money from the accounts so the profits made were undetected, and the authorities wouldn't sniff around his business. Unfortunately, before Cronin could explain further, Richie was called by Ivan. Upon meeting, Ivan told him that he had found Richie's father gambling at a casino using counterfeit banknotes and was now a fugitive with a debt totaling more than $187,000. He then used this information to threaten Richie. He said that he had paid off all of Richie's father's debts in exchange for Richie's loyalty. After that, Richie met his father, who was also in Costa Rica with the facilities that Ivan had given to him. He was annoyed with his father, who could easily be tricked by Ivan, but apparently this was his father's way of preventing him from getting into trouble. He just wanted Richie to go back to college and leave the world of gambling because he didn't want his son to grow up like him, becoming a gambler, causing a lot of problems. Finally, Richie had a plan. While still doing the task of delivering bribe money to several local officials and police, he secretly took a small amount of the money for himself. After that, Richie contacted his friends again and said that he had found the data he needed to trap Ivan. Unfortunately, Ivan called him, so the call was disconnected. In the evening, Richie went home only to find Cronin no longer there. Not long after, Rebecca came and informed him that Ivan was planning to leave. He had vacated his office and was ready to leave everything behind, but this business needed a scapegoat to hand over to the police, and that person was Richie, so Richie made another plan to catch Ivan and hoped that Rebecca could help him. The next day, as usual, Richie did his job bribing lots of people until suddenly, a car chased him. Inside, it was Agent Shavers, who was angry with him and who stopped providing information to him. On the other hand, Richie was annoyed because the FBI couldn't protect his father and Cronin, who apparently was kidnapped by Iva. Shavers admitted his mistake and promised to comply with Richie's request as long as he helped him find evidence to arrest Ivan. After that, Richie uncovered Cronin's findings from Ivan's online gambling site about customers who had been exploited by Ivan. This collection of data would become Richie's secret weapon to arrest his own boss. So the next day, according to his plan, he left his apartment and went straight to America. So when the Costa Rican police looked for him, he was no longer there. Meanwhile, Ivan decided to go to Antigua with Rebecca. He felt confident that Richie had been arrested by the police, so he left Costa Rica without any worries and was going to start his business from scratch in a new place. However, he was wrong. When his private jet landed, he actually met Richie, who told him that he was not in Antigua, but in America. So with all the evidence of the crimes he had committed, Ivan was arrested immediately. After Ivan was caught, Agent Shavers intended to arrest Richie, but he could do that without him knowing it. Richie had run away from there. Just before he went to chase him, someone came to him and gave him something, namely a flash drive from Richie containing customer data that Cronin had found, which would be evidence of Ivan's crime. So according to his promise, Shavers finally freed Richie. Finally, Richie could start his new life with Rebecca.